Thank you very much. Look at that, people cheering. That's never happened before. Right, how does this work? Thank you, Baz. 5 years from now, the world is a dark and terrible place. Our lives and our experiences are managed by robots and machines and artificial intelligences, which are owned and operated by international conglomerates like Microsoft, like Alphabet, like Apple. Over the course of 2, now 3 maybe years, I have read every press release, analyzed every merger, every acquisition, looked at the decisions and the movements and the power plays being rolled out by global corporations, the power players in the tech space, to try and understand what their long game is. Because it becomes increasingly apparent that they all have a plan, and that Microsoft, that Apple, that Facebook intend to dominate the world, all in their own spaces, all in their own ways, but they all want to win. They all want to own our human experiences. They're carving out niches. And when you start to analyze where they're competing and where they're going, you see that there are patterns, and that there are only 5, maybe 6 fundamental areas of the human experience, and each of them is chasing these areas, because they know that, for example, Apple does a phenomenally good job at owning the idea of aspiration. And rather than trying to sell you mobile phones, they sell you the idea of being a better human, about being more personable, about having better friends, being more successful. All of these brands are trying to achieve their version of this. Now, this gets a little scary, because the world that this creates isn't necessarily a pleasant one. None of these areas of human experience are actually things that we need. When you analyze true human requirements, you end up with something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we need to be warm and loved and to have a roof over our heads and to feel like we're achieving. These are the things that generate these companies' profit. And it's very easy to confuse the two. And there is a real danger that we as digital marketeers are directly responsible for creating a dystopia that destroys the world as we know it. I think unless we are very, very careful and we take efforts to understand where we're going and what the implications are, that we can make a real mess that we struggle to tidy up. I want to talk you through how the next few years of the digital economy unfold and what it means to the businesses who operate there, what it means to us as practitioners who are involved in that, and what it means on a global scale. I'm going to talk very, very quickly, because there's about 2 hours worth of content to get through, and you're all very tired, so I want to use pace to keep you awake. So the online revolution starts offline on the high street. I want to talk about Waterstones as an example, who are a UK bookstore retailer. They are owned by HMV Group, who are the organization who famously failed to adopt to digital, and as a result, all of their stores went out of business. They failed to keep up with the changing nature of the music space, and they lost millions and millions of pounds. Waterstones have seen this coming, and they have a plan. They are planning to reinvent themselves as a personal assistant, because they understand that it's a much better experience, much more profitable for them if, rather than trying to sell me books when I walk into their store, they try and own my experience of reading and entertainment. If I go in and I'm greeted by name, they know what I like, they know what I've read before, because they could very easily say, partner with Amazon or the Goodreads API or a number of other services to track and monitor my behavior through my Kindle, through my purchasing patterns. They can start to build an understanding of me as an individual consumer. And over time and over multiple purchases and multiple experiences, they can start to learn what I like, what I don't like, and they can begin to make recommendations. They can start to reposition the whole experience to feel more like shopping in an Apple store. It's not a coincidence that the pioneers and the big tech brands are reinventing their retail experience to feel this way. It's because they know that when they win me as a consumer, rather than winning the £5 in my pocket in a sale and trying to sell me things one at a time, they generate value over my entire consumer lifetime at a much higher rate. If this feels a little bit out there and a bit speculative and a bit science fiction, I want to point you to a page from their website. This is waterstones.com/about us from June 2016, and it's incredibly pixelated, but it essentially says, we recognize that consumer behavior is changing. We want to avoid the mistakes that our group has made in the past. We recognize that digital is pivotal and important, and here is what we're going to do. We're going to reinvent our stores. We're going to use data to understand what people want. We're going to anticipate their needs, and we're going to delight them with excellent customer service, because we know that's what people want and it makes everybody win. This is happening now. Why is that significant? Because once they do, the rest of the market starts to adapt. When Waterstones makes a power play to own my entertainment and to understand what I like and what I don't like, other brands will start to react. People like Game, for example, who a very geeky, very specific example, but they sell video games, consoles, hardware. They could very easily use something like the PlayStation API or the Steam API to understand what I do on an evening, the games I play, the media I watch in my living room, and then it's not a huge leap for them to say, because you like this kind of thing, you might want these nice new headphones. And because you like these nice new headphones, why don't we also infer that because you do this sort of thing, you might like this sort of music, or you might want to watch this sort of film. Once brands start using data in this kind of way and analyzing my behavior over long periods, they can start to branch out. Game could very easily attempt to become a media super brand. Amazon already own a lot of this heartland, but they could provide a more personable experience. Why is this relevant? Because it breaks digital marketing. Because at the moment, we operate in a world where we analyze the size and the shape of the market. We say there are 1 million people here searching for a thing. Throw some advertising at them and hope that some of them convert, and we'll pay a reasonable CPA for that, or we'll do organic search and we'll try and attract and acquire them. The problem in this world is that because the brands already know what I like, they already know what I want, they've already marketed to me individually, they've already anticipated my needs, I don't enter that buying cycle. I don't go to Google and I don't research for things because the brands already know what I need and what I want and have fulfilled that. There are fewer people in the funnel. That means you have less market, you have lower impressions, your cost per acquisition rockets, your cost per action rockets. It's harder to compete in organic search because everyone's fighting over a smaller base. There are fewer people in your marketplace, and you don't even know that that's what's happening. It's incredibly hard to measure because there's just less demand. Because people you might otherwise have been able to reach and advertise to you are no longer reachable at all. The washing machine I might have Googled for when mine broke, as the company I bought it from has already anticipated it. Argos, for example, might own my need for white goods, and they will anticipate that 3 years from now they should contact me and say, your washing machine probably wants replacing. The search I would have done now no longer happens. That's incredibly hard to deal with. As a result, a whole load of commodity brands like Dixon's, like Carphone Warehouse, like the brands who rely very heavily on footfall, will struggle enormously when it comes to key trading periods. There are few people in the funnel, so their acquisition costs rise. Footfall diminishes significantly, and these brands struggle to make a profit, and in fact, quite possibly go out of business. Wave 1 then hits us hard, and we need to very, very quickly realize that if we're just chasing individual sales, rather than chasing the consumers behind them, that market's going to dry up and we're not going to understand why. In fact, if you're not actively looking at lifetime value as your key metric, more importantly than sales, more importantly than revenue, more importantly than growth, if you're not understanding the potential value of your marketplace in terms of individual people and maximizing that over time, you're going to start to lose. Because other brands will get there, and they will get there smartly, and it's already happening. Waterstones are doing it now in their sector. Other brands are doing it in theirs. Your market will dry up. That's scary. Wave 2. The most important and impactful thing that starts to happen now is Uber. It's very easy to think of Uber as a taxi company and very easy to get distracted by driverless cars. Neither of those are interesting. What's interesting about Uber is they are a data company. Uber is an API. Uber is uniquely capable of all the organizations in the world right now of understanding the most effective way to get a thing from a location to another location. At the moment, that's people. They do taxis. Increasingly, they're doing shipping. They're doing delivery, they're doing pizzas, they're doing food. I know that in Canada, they took 40% of Just Eat's market overnight because it's frictionless and they're just piggybacking extra services on their infrastructure. There's some really interesting things that Uber are doing. They are opening up APIs for third-party services, so you can, for example, very easily, if you are DHL or a parcel supplier, it doesn't make sense to operate your own infrastructure that understands where all your vehicles are on optimal delivery routes. You will ping an Uber API, and it will manage it all for you. They become a data service in the same way that AWS and Amazon Cloud is. Essentially, Uber's game is to become the first and last mile of everything. They will never own intercity or intercontinental or transatlantic movement of things. But if you want to get something to move inside a city, Uber is the backbone of that, not necessarily the taxis, not necessarily Uber as you know it as a consumer, but Uber the data service and Uber the infrastructure company will manage that process. I'm going to skip over a whole lot of this because I don't have enough time to go into any depth, but essentially at the moment they are rolling out Uber APIs into vans and lorries, into automated vehicles, all sorts. The key thing that makes Uber interesting and why this is their thing is they are aiming towards 100% utilization. So the more Uber cars there are on the road, the less time you wait as a consumer for your taxi. The less time you wait, the more active the drivers are, which means they're more efficient, which means they're making more money, which means that more people use the service. Uber has this kind of positive feedback loop, which means it grows and grows and grows until it covers the entire city and reaches the suburbs. They are the only service which can reach suburban areas with a high enough fidelity and coverage to be able to effectively ship without becoming a shipping company. This mission to make them ubiquitous in taxis is actually masking a greater plan to allow them to own delivery. Driverless cars are a thing, but they're not particularly interesting. I'm not going to go into that, but there's a huge amount of social conventions that need to be solved for before driverless cars can effectively do anything interesting, and Uber will struggle with that in the short term. Why is that interesting? Because transport and delivery is the thing that stops Amazon making its power play. When you commoditize delivery and you reduce the effective cost of getting a thing across a city towards zero, Amazon can go full steam on trying to own fulfillment. Amazon's game is to get you the thing you want. Anything in a box, it's their mission to deliver it to you. Not necessarily the actual delivery, but to be the brand where you buy it from. When you look at things like Amazon Dash and Amazon Pantry and Amazon Fresh and a whole bunch of these other things they're rolling out, these are essentially field tests for them preparing to be able to ship perishable goods, like milk and bread, which you can't do unless you can store it locally and transport it effectively and understand all the volume and the demand curves, etc. These are all them building up, getting ready to expand their proposition enormously. In fact, when you also consider that they're investing very, very heavily in automated warehouses and processes, it becomes apparent just how aggressively they are tackling this concept of dominating on anything in a box. Amazon Prime, all of their loyalty and subscription services are all designed to solidify their position as the provider of things. And the transport angle is the one thing remaining before they can get there. Interestingly, simultaneously, they are opening thousands of bookstores across the US. They've field tested a few of these. They've done very, very well. They've stocked them based on reviews. Now, that's a really interesting shopping experience, that at a hyper-local level, I can go into a store, and the things on the shelves are rated highly by people like me, by people in this area. The chance of me buying and converting is much higher than if I walked into another type of store, for example. And then some really interesting stuff happens as it becomes apparent that they're not going to be bookstores forever. They become click-and-collect stores. They start to compete with the likes of Argos because they have the warehousing, they have the delivery, they understand local demand. They can use the stores to A/B test hyperlocal behavior and preference, which they can feed back to their website and vice versa. The presence of physical retail stores is a huge data play, which they can use to improve service, which they can then use to roll out Amazon Go, which becomes the new supermarket. There's very little stopping them doing this in the way that somebody like Tesco would really, really struggle. Because in order to do this, they would need to fundamentally re-architect their entire business, whereas for Amazon, it's just another step in their direction. Interestingly, Amazon are trying to fight back on the ownership of delivery and transport. They're building their own processes, planes, drones, etc. They will lose, because the long game on owning delivery is about distributed data points. You need to understand traffic densities, roadworks, jams, accidents at a level far more distributed than Amazon will be able to work out with delivery lorries, because there will be many, many more Uber vehicles and vehicles on the Uber network on the road than there will Amazon vehicles. And in fact, some of the vehicle manufacturers themselves, the Fords, the Nissans, are currently building in telemetric software powered by some of Uber's infrastructure and back-end API data services. Uber have already won this. What else? I should point out that there are other brands. This is a little bit UK and Western-centric. Brands like Alibaba have similar ambitions. But I'm not invested enough and enough of an expert to understand the implications. However, they are playing similar games. My suspicion is that the intersection of Uberization, of a whole bunch of other stuff that I'm going to talk about, means that Amazon will win in the long term, but we'll have some interesting stuff happen overseas. I mentioned this because any minute now, millions and millions of entrepreneurs will come online for the first time from developing countries. In particular, Google's satellite network. They've just launched a whole load of broadband infrastructure in India. Facebook, Aquila, Tesla's broadband network are all designed to connect the world overnight. Millions of people who've never been online with high-fidelity broadband will become entrepreneurs. They all have ideas, they all have aspirations, they all have products, they all have businesses. And when you look at things like Uber and like Airbnb, and when you examine what there is at the heart of that, they are ideas and data services. You could develop Uber, or something like Uber, that level of business, in these economies, and deploy and disrupt our economy over here in a way that's incredibly advantageous for them because of currency exchange rates and other issues. We will have a fragmentation of business ideas and platforms and entrepreneurialism entering our market any minute now. I should be moving this as I talk. That would make much more sense. Interestingly, one of the barriers to that at the moment is effective international currency translations. The successor to Bitcoin will overcome a lot of this, and we will see these people start to disrupt our markets. What's interesting of note is that none of this will happen on big old e-commerce platforms. The businesses and brands and technology and transactions that happen will disrupt existing services. In the same way that in China, WeChat is an all-in-one hub for commerce and conversation and other things, people will deploy services within WhatsApp, within other ecosystems. It will create a resurgence of platforms like eBay and other areas. None of this will happen on big, clunky websites. I mention this because it means that marketplaces, in the truest sense of the word, where people come to barter and exchange in free-form manner, become the new digital marketplaces. Things like eBay, things like Etsy, things like Folksy experience a massive surge in demand because these are platforms where there is very, very low threshold of effort for these people to enter. And indeed, also when you consider that the cost of commodity goods drops because Amazon gets its act together, the cost of transport drops because Uberized infrastructure is a thing, suddenly we enter a world where all of us have lots more disposable cash. There is zero barrier of entry to be an entrepreneur. If I make artisanal watches once a year, the cost now to get that to market is quite high. The cost tomorrow, when there's no delivery charge, when it's easy to store and ship it, when it's easy to set up a marketplace, is nil. Not only will the emerging world flood our world with entrepreneurs, so will we. We will all become producers and artisanal people in our own right, maybe. The point being that maybe the current paradigm of have a big old website that you try and attract people to and then convert them from a market that might not exist maybe breaks a little bit when also people want to transact with other human beings on things like Etsy and eBay. It's a little bit scary when you consider how different this is to our current way of thinking. Why is that interesting? Because the net itself is fragmenting, and our concept of websites and how digital works is broken. This is a stolen slide from a guy called Pierre Farr, who's an ex-Google engineer, who's very tall and very smart, who talks about the nascent distributed content ecosystem, which in a nutshell suggests that today we have websites, AMP, Facebook instant pages, Apple stuff, and a bunch of others. Tomorrow we will have 10 times more of those. Next week we will have 100 times more of those. Some of them will succeed and become the next Facebook. Some of them will fail. Some of them will exist for 6 months, but your consumers will be on them. And you will have to make business decisions as to whether you want to invest in connecting to that architecture. Should we build an integration for WhatsApp? I don't know. Will WhatsApp succeed? Will it fail? Is it the right audience? That's 6 months dev work. Tomorrow there will be 100 of those apps. Which ones do you integrate with? Technically, we will need to learn to pivot our architectures and the way we think about building services in order to be free-form and fluid and connect to these. It should be a day's work to integrate a new platform. We will need to be API first, and we will need to build hub-and-spoke models instead of websites, where our website is one output of our brand and our properties and our data. It's a very different way of thinking. All of this is challenging. Simultaneously, 3D printing finally takes off. Amazon have already won 3D printing. They have a huge marketplace that they don't talk about a lot on the website, but if you search, you can find it. They sell templates. They sell 3D printed goods. You can design your own things. Why is this significant? Because they take off in public hubs. Now, it's unrealistic to expect every home to have a full-fledged 3D printer because some of the materials will be perishable and you need lots of different materials. However, in things like train stations where you can go in and order, this becomes really interesting. This is an image of an actual cafe in London called the Maker's Cafe where you go in and you get a coffee and you say, I'll have one of those, please, and it 3D prints for you. The van exists. You order something from Amazon, it 3D prints whilst it drives to you, so you get it overnight. The point is that all of these suddenly have a route to market. The 3D printed goods and the templates themselves can also exist on eBay and Etsy and Folksy and Marketo and other areas and all these apps. Not only do we have millions of entrepreneurs filling the marketplace, suddenly they're producing and selling ideas and things which don't cost anything to manufacture, never mind to ship or to sell. The whole market becomes fluid and freeform, and everybody just barters and exchanges and sells things. The quality goes up as well. These markets automatically optimize for a good intersect of quality and price in the same way that eBay does. This changes the way that we transact as individuals. I don't want to buy an expensive piece of clothes or some soft furnishings or some furniture. I can get a unique thing from an artisanal producer who lives somewhere locally, who uses ethically sourced materials cheaper and better than I can from Argos. Why would I not? This means that drones aren't a thing, they never take off. The idea of drones delivering is woefully inefficient when you live in a world where Uberized infrastructure is a thing. However, drones as sensors in the sky is an interesting proposition, that companies like Uber might want to use drones to understand traffic density and pedestrian flow and areas of unrest and all sorts of other bits. When you feed that into their network, they become phenomenally enriched. This means that a whole bunch of brands who just sell shit will die. Brands who have commodity goods and things that can be 3D printed or made by the guy down the street, which sit on shelves and have a markup, will just fail. There is no route for brands like Accessorize or H. Samuel to exist 5 years from now. Hopefully nobody works on any of these. Interestingly, Tesco the other day bought Booker, which is an enormous wholesale retailer where the supermarkets themselves go to get their goods. This is a reaction to this emerging world and them attempting to secure the transport and delivery portion for at least a little bit longer. That will buy them another 3 or 4 years of lifespan before they become unsalvageable. Good try, guys. So wave 2, there are no USPs. Every successful business that you can think about that's maybe older than 5 or 6 years was built on the idea that it was cheaper or closer or faster or bigger or better. All of those are things that can be disrupted tactically and deliberately if you have the budget and the idea. That none of those are things anymore. They're not secure, they're not safe, they're all very, very transient. Essentially, in order to survive, you need a unique value proposition, and you need to be flexible enough to pivot and change and to evolve to fulfill the customer needs where they are, not to try and bring them to you. And individually, you need to become deeply technical. Onto the point, one of the questions of Philly's talk was, do you need to be technical if you're in this game? The answer is yes. The web itself is fragmenting. We're talking about app infrastructure. We're talking about JavaScript apps, Angular, JS, Node, etc. The tech is where that fragmentation will happen. And unless you understand that, you might wake up and find you're no longer a digital marketer, but just a marketer, which is a little bit scary. Wave 3. Is anyone dead yet? We all right? Excellent. Voice search takes off gradually. It never becomes commonplace because it's socially awkward to talk to your device in public places. However, in the home and in private, this takes off. There are 2 companies pioneering this. MindMeld and Hound are doing some really fascinating stuff with understanding complex queries, which makes it viable to do conversational interfaces. Rather than phrasing a specific question, I can just talk to my device in a Star Trek computer kind of way, and it will solve my queries. That's really cool. Conversational interfaces in the larger bit of a fad. It is woefully inefficient to talk to a chatbot to order pizza, or even to type. If I say, hi, how are you? Yes, I'd like a pizza, pepperoni, please, stuffed crust, this size. The amount of keystrokes and energy and attention and eye movements and cognitive load is much higher than using an app that's designed for purpose. This is a fad, it will go away. I want to challenge some of the stuff that Jess said in her VR talk earlier. I think there's some really exciting stuff happening with VR and the possibilities for mixed reality, self-service in particular, so things like Microsoft and Skype did a really good demo of a lady saying, my sink is leaking, and a plumber on the other end of her VR device pointing at a bit and saying, twist that. There's some interesting stuff around white and blue collar jobs and what it means in VR. I think, however, the challenge with VR and mixed and augmented reality is that somebody will have to build it, which means somebody has to pay for it. And there's a reason that all the content we consume isn't incredible and sensory and rich media, and most of it is shitty and poorly written text. It's because businesses commission content, and it's less expensive to get away with minimum viable product. There will be some incredible experiences, but they won't change the world, and the whole web isn't going to become VR overnight because companies will not invest in it well enough to achieve success. I want to come to a pivotal point, which is the idea that your fridge will never buy you milk. We are all waiting for a digital revolution where suddenly everything becomes connected and smart and we all join this wonderful utopia. My fridge can very easily mechanically measure the amount of milk in my fridge. What happens when it runs out? Where does it order it from? Okay, so Amazon are gaming on that. Amazon have a plan to be the vendor of the milk. How does that transaction work? Does my fridge contain firmware with an e-commerce payment gateway? Because that's concerning, because people who make baby monitors are currently exposing live access to webcams on the net because they're not locking down their software. People who make fridges probably also aren't experts in security, and therefore any transaction I use to pay for my milk is going to be hackable, exposed, etc. My fridge itself can't manage the payment. So maybe I subscribe to some kind of third-party thing in PayPal, and every time I buy milk, it costs me an extra 2 pence. But then I've also got a smart toaster and maybe a smart freezer and a smart cupboard. I don't want to subscribe and have subscription costs to all the things in my kitchen. That's not a great model either. Also, if my fridge is going to tell me what I should have for dinner tonight, it needs to know what's in my freezer. And that was manufactured by a different company, and they don't talk to each other. And actually, I've got stuff on the shelf as well that it needs to know about. All of these use different schemas, 2 different companies, physical representation. This doesn't gel. None of these things are smart enough, and I don't trust the companies who make them to do a good enough job to connect them and to make that all secure. What we're missing from this world is this. There is a reason why Google, Apple, Samsung, Amazon, and Microsoft, and others are all aggressively competing to put a device in your home. Now, the Google Home Hub is a little bit later than expected, but is phenomenally more sophisticated than Alexa, which at least got first mover advantage. Why is this important? Because the fridge's job isn't to buy milk. The fridge's job is to say, I'm out of milk, to the Home Hub, and for the Home Hub to manage the decision on what happens next. The Home Hub is connected to my Google account. It's connected to my calendar. It's connected to my home through my Google Nest. It's connected to where I am because my Google account's also on my phone. It's connected to all my preferences, everywhere, my credit card. The Home Hub, the idea of the Home Hub is the thing that's missing to start to connect all these experiences. And this is really important. I'll come to why. They are essentially the center of the digital representation of you as an individual. And as marketers, this enables us to do some pretty cool stuff. Intriguingly, this allows Google now to finally become the thing it's always been promised, this omnipotent device that suggests things on the fly that says, hey, it's raining, do you want to order some takeaway? It's never managed to achieve that level of fidelity because the phone isn't enough. Being in your pocket on that device doesn't give it enough access, doesn't give it enough permissions or data. Being in the home and being the voice unit and a whole bunch of other things allows us to take that step. Interestingly, there are rumors that Microsoft is trying to create an equivalent to an Alexa or a Google Home, but for the office. So something that manages voice comms in the office and Teams and meetings and availability, all sorts of other stuff. It's an interesting angle for them. Why is this significant? Because it means that capitalism breaks. Not only digital marketing, but the whole concept of capitalism. At the moment, I own a lawnmower. I paid maybe £30 for it. In this world, I would 3D print a lawnmower that was intelligent enough to talk to my Home Hub to schedule and manage cutting my grass and handling it itself. And maybe actually I share a 3D printed one on a schedule where multiple Home Hubs talk to each other and I never need to buy a lawnmower again. Now, it's one very isolated example, but capitalism is based on the idea that I do some work, earn a salary, and buy stuff. And if I stop buying stuff, the whole economy breaks down. That's a little bit scary and nobody solved that. It also means that my relationship with higher-end products changes. So at the moment, I buy a TV, and I pay some of that for the hardware, some of it for the software. 5 minutes, and we're much faster. Increasingly, I'm subscribing to the cloud software behind it, and our relationships with brands will change to reflect that. Essentially, personal assistants make me less responsible for my decisions. The key thing for the whole of this is that these assistant devices in this world will use my past behavior as a proxy for preference. So all of marketing now is based on the premise that somebody says, I want a thing, and we go, I've got a thing, it's cheaper than the other guys. In this new world, you will never say, I want a thing, because the device will know, or you'll say, I want a thing, and the device will decide. And it will say, well, of all the options I've analyzed, that one you've never looked at, that one your friends didn't like, that one you left a negative review, that one you've used twice before, we'll use that one. As digital marketers and marketeers, we will need to have advertised 6 months ago. We will need to have created the data that these systems use to inform our decisions. I'm going to skip a whole section because this is boring stuff about privacy and get on to the robots and the end of the world. So wave 3, you've got to avoid creating friction, and friction might mean not being in the right environment. It might be being in the wrong environment with the wrong message. It might mean trying to advertise too late. Don't forget that you can't advertise to and interrupt these people because they are not in your research funnel. They have never expressed a need that they've never actively gone out and searched, because they've already had their needs fulfilled, and if they have, the machines have decided for them. You need to reorganize your engine, re-engineer your organization to deliver experiences and branded experiences rather than just selling products. Okay, in 2 minutes or less, what does this mean for you? There are only 4 types of brands that exceed and excel in the future, and I've just skipped past one of them. Fashion is particularly interesting, and big brands like Primark who own the entire retail development fulfillment process. Very, very hard to decouple that. They will quite happily plow on in their own right. Until they failed miserably. Pebble were a really nice example. The lovable underdog, who when I bought one of these and bought into their brand story, every watch I ever buy will be from them if they hadn't up so badly. Enormous conglomerates who disrupt internally. So I know that Trinity Mirror Group, who own most of the newspapers in the UK, have a dedicated team whose job it is to disrupt their own business. 12 people who work full-time and say, if we understand that all we have is a brand name and an audience, why don't we sell cars or scratch cards or holidays? And they design new businesses that use what they've got, their connection and their capital, to do new things. So as the newspaper industry dies, these new ideas emerge and they keep going. That's pretty smart. And brands who do 10 times better than everybody else because they use machine learning and AI to kick ass and do large-scale data and connection. Why is that important? Because Moore's law, which suggests that technology gets exponentially, increasingly better and powerful and cheap on and continues at least for a little bit longer. Why is that important? Because it means that things like Google Cloud and AWS and Amazon's machine learning platforms get cheaper, the threshold of entry lowers, they get easier to use. You can throw huge sets of big data and store that and process it and derive learnings in a way you'd never be able to before. Why is that important? Because it means that if you phone large telecoms companies, increasingly, for example, in the UK, you are answered by a machine that attempts to solve your query. If it fails, it continues to listen while a human operator comes on the line, learns for next time, then gets it right. These people are engineering themselves out of a job by training their replacements. This isn't contained to this industry. This is happening everywhere. You're talking about phenomenal processing and huge data sets, but that's easy when you've got Google Cloud. If you're in PPC, you are screwed because you are just a pattern matching monkey. Computers can do that much better. Actually, you need to retrain very quickly to think about how you mentor those systems and how you curate the data you feed it. If you are manually changing ad copy and creating groups, you have a problem. Why is that interesting? Because Google's hub devices and an understanding of what I need and what I want and where I am and what's open and what's closed and what they sell and all the rich markup means that I might not need to interact with an ad at all. It might just find me the best option and the best price. Why is that interesting? Because it's happening now. I can't remember why I stole this, but this is an example of real-time price modification on the fly by a couple of big businesses, not just to be the cheapest at any point in time, but to find automatically the best intersect between cost versus competitors versus the time of day versus the phase of the moon versus who's in the presidential seat versus a myriad of dimensions and factors that human beings would never be able to understand or optimize for. But when you're a machine with that kind of scale, you can just throw stuff at it and it'll find patterns you'd never even imagine. Why is that interesting? Because at the moment we only think about this in the context of business. However, when you zoom out and start to think if they can do this, why wouldn't they also buy and build businesses? Why wouldn't you put them in charge of branding? Why would you not make machine learning systems responsible for people's salaries and KPIs? Oh wait, they are. That's happening now. There is a company in China who has an AI on the board of directors with voting rights, because it sees patterns that they don't in global stock markets, in weather, in trends, in migration, in populations, again, in things that we would never even imagine to look at. It analyzes on a scale which is incomprehensible to the human mind and finds patterns and opportunities which it then says, we should invest in this company. Nobody knows why, but it gets it right more than they do. Why is that interesting? Because it means that we're screwed too, all the way up to the top of our ivory tower. We are just pattern matching monkeys. We look at trends and patterns and we make decisions. Why is that interesting? Because it means there's mass unemployment, that we need to re-engineer what we are and all our skills. I'm going very fast because I'm out of time. It means we need to think about what marketing and advertising and sales and retention means to us. However, you're too late because the companies who are already doing this are already far too far ahead, and the companies aren't too slow because their senior people don't get it and they can't move fast enough, which means we're stuck living in a world which is run by the superpowers and conglomerates and the Googles and the Alphabets who just eat up the competition. It's no surprise that they're all fragmenting and building multiple brands because they can just buy each other and eat each other up faster than they can be legislated against. What's that mean for us? It means you need to pick one of those, because they're the only brands that are going to exist in a couple of years, and align yourself best to that. Hopefully, by telling you this, we've changed the course of the future and everything's going to be okay. What do? Last slide. You have to be the best you can possibly be. And that's incredibly fluffy, and I apologize for how inactionable that is. But it means that you need to be technically savvy, you need to be strategically savvy, you need to think about the implications of what we do. Most importantly, you have a choice to look beyond just beating your competitor today. This world doesn't just happen. This chain of events unfolds because you in this room, we drive that change. In 1,000, in a million little decisions on which technologies we use, the decisions we make, the preferences we have, whether we outbid this, what we choose, what we tell our CEO, we are the architects of this dystopia. Essentially, pick a side. Because I quite like this world. I like how clean and nice and organized it is, but I can understand that there's a human aspect missing from it, that we live in a world driven by corporate priorities and their systems. So decide whether you want to cut off all your access to the internet and get out digital, or whether you want to help me craft this new and exciting and potentially slightly scary world. Thank you very much.